welcome to this month's edition of Mytech U, where we're going to talk about backups. This is a area of our industry that there's a wide array of options, solutions, and variables that, the whole point of your backup is not just to be able to feel comfortable that you have a backup, but it's to make sure that you can actually recover. So with all the options out there, how do you know which ones to choose that's the right one to protect your business and the variables associated with your business? So that's our objective today, is to kind of go through the different components of backups. We're fortunate that we're going to be joined by Philip Holt, who's one of the founders of Mytech, as well as CTO, sales engineer, solutions architect. Those are all the roles he fills. And he's going to go through and give some explanation to the technical details, as well as make sure that we relate it to your business. And then at the end, as kind of a wrap-up, we're going to go through some budgetary and understanding how to think about where is probably an appropriate ballpark from a budgetary perspective relative to the solutions as it makes sense relative to the size of your organization. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Philip. He's going to lead us through the majority of the slides, and hopefully I'll interject with some thoughts and questions from the audience as they come through. And go ahead and please use the question and answer on the side for those who are watching live, and those who are listening in at a future date. Obviously, you can contact Mytech with additional questions you may have. So that's it, Philip. Please take it away, and we'll go from here.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan, for that. Yeah, once again, my name is Philip Holt. I'm the CTO of here at Mytech Partners, and one of the jobs that I perform is to make sure that the solutions we provide our customers really meet their business needs. And as Nathan mentioned, backup is a big part of that. We're going to talk about a couple of different things today. We're really going to talk, kind of get around to some of the terms and the words and the different words and terms that are used to describe backup technologies. We're also going to go over some of the different types and their major categories and discuss why you might choose one over the other. And finally, we're going to discuss how these things have those real impacts on your business in general during the course of ordinary business, and then also when things go bad. So there's a bunch of terms here that I'd like to spend a little bit of time. We're going to go over and discuss just so that everyone's kind of using the same language and we can understand what we're talking about when we discuss backup. So beginning with recovery time objectives, or what are often acronated to RTO. When we should back up and discuss when we're making a backup, what we're really doing is we're taking a copy of the data at a point in time with the ability to be able to recover that data at some future point in time. So the variables that we deal with in order describing those are RTO and RPO, or recovery point objective. The difference between these two items is that the recovery point objective is the time at which we take a backup. So if everything's going well and we run our backup at noon, then we have created for ourselves a recovery point at noon. Doesn't mean we're going to do anything with it, but it exists. In the event that something goes bad and we're missing data or we need to recover, there's a period of time which it may take to get back to that recovery point. So in the example I provided, we take a backup at noon. Things go south around 2 o'clock, and the boss calls up and says, I need to get everything back up and running. There is an amount of time it's going to take me to recover all the data that I backed up at noon and represent it back to my user base. And that time that it takes in between when we declare that we need to recover and the time when the data is actually recovered is the recovery time, or the RTO. We also have a discussion here. We've talked about backup in the big sense, and we throw that word around. But what I oftentimes have discussions with my customers about is the fact that when we talk about backup, we generally are taking 3 different concepts and pooling them all together. So I'd like to take a moment here to kind of flesh those out and describe the kind of 3 major portions that are oftentimes described with the single term backup. So in terms of a backup per se, we're really just simply talking about a copy of data or systems or information, which means that I have something that's good and working, and I want to make another copy of it in case, just in case. And that is generally a one-time, single point in time that I make a copy of, and that would be like a recovery point. Disaster recovery is the term we use to describe what happens when there's an issue in my business or issue in my computing network, and I need to execute a plan that's going to return me to an operational status. Example, the building burns down. How do I get people back online? How do I get them connected back to their email? How do I get them connected back to their applications they need to do their jobs? Archiving is another type of backup, but has a slightly different need. It's not used in the case where the building burned down or the sprinkler went off. It's more used in the case that I have some data that I need to keep a copy of for a long time, either for internal use and analysis or perhaps for regulatory purposes, where I'm required by my industry to keep a copy of all the things that I've been working on for the last 7 years. These three different functions of a backup technology are oftentimes wrapped together, but I think it's a good backup solution will accomplish all three of these types. And as we go through the different types and technologies used for backup, we'll kind of compare and contrast which ones are stronger or weaker at these different components. Again, as we discuss backup technology, there are primarily two different types of backups that we can take. And remembering that when we take when we're making a backup, we're making a copy of data or systems. And historically, way back in time, we would all of our data consisted of single files that were stored on computer networks. And we would take those files and we would copy them one at a time, either using a tool or a software or manually, to another location or storage place like a disk. And each one of those files would be copied off one at a time to a discrete, separate, protected space. That works well for recovering the user-type files like Excel and Word and PDF files and images, but it doesn't work well for live systems like operating systems or databases or email systems, where we're looking at these functions that are critical to our business that are comprised of multiple systems working together or multiple files and programs that act as a unit. So the alternate method that has been developed to back up systems is, instead of backing up all the data on a file-by-file basis, we actually take a snapshot or a picture of a given system, oftentimes in a single server operating system environment, and we set that aside. So an example of a database or an email server, we would simply make an entire copy of the entire hard drives, systems, configurations of a given server operating system in another place. It becomes unwieldy to make that full copy of all that data multiple times, but fortunately we can use some technological tricks to, as we move forward in time, to only take a picture of the delta or the changes that have been made to the server. So in other words, if we take a picture or an image or a snapshot of our mail server, the next time we come around to make a backup of that, all we have to back up is the difference in between the stuff we've already copied off and where the system is now. Important in backing up and archiving and disaster recovery is the ability to verify that just because we've copied the data or made replicas of our information, we know that we can get it back. Different technologies will have different strengths with regards to how we can back up, how we can test and recover that information as needed. Copying the data to a separate location is not always in and of itself enough. If we are, for example, if we are copying data from one system inside of a building to another system inside of the building, and something happens to the building, we have no backups at all. So having a separate, discrete, off-site location is part of a good backup and disaster recovery solution. Examples of this oftentimes may be internet-based or cloud-based storage. Also, some institutions or companies will use the fact that they already have multiple geographically dispersed sites and make multiple copies from one location to the other. The big picture here is that having just one copy of our backup is often not enough. We should have multiple copies of our data in multiple locations. Knowing that our backups are working is critical to us sleeping at night. So setting up a system and then letting it go in the same way that we needed to test our backup to ensure that it's usable in the future, we also want to know right away if there's any problem or if the backups that we expected to occur didn't occur. So different types of alerting are present in the different backup technologies that we use. We'll talk about those a little bit later on.
And Phil, before you move on to the next one, I appreciate putting those details in there, because I'll tell you, if there's anything that in the conversations that I've had over the years with customers that is not that it's part of the backup solution is not just about making sure you have a backup. It is making sure that the recovery meets your objectives, and that's the whole point of your backup. You don't your business. It's not just to be able to say, oh gosh, I feel I can sleep well at night, but making sure that it enables your team to get back and recover the information in whatever form or fashion, and that's really the key piece that people oftentimes forget when they talk about a backup. And when you wrap reality around that, as far as, well, look, this backup solution, yes, gives you a backup, but it's going to take you 72 hours to recover. And if it's 72 hours is not ideal or not optimal or not what meets your business requirements, then we need to have a different solution. So it's the backup and then the ability to recover is the flip side of that. And we also hope that customers never have to use this. Like all this stuff we're talking about, I quite frankly hope that you never have to use it. But the reality is, when you do need to use it, we want to have the confidence that it actually was working, kind of like you said. So anyway, I'd just like to interject that that's oftentimes a significant part of our conversation, at a business level with our customers. So.
Absolutely. And, tying on to all that, again, as we never want to have to use this, and no one's ever going to complain that the recovery time is too slow if we never have to use it. But when we do need to use our recover to our backup, we need to have there are multiple ways of doing that. And what I'd like to discuss here is the difference between a local and cloud-based disaster recovery. So again, as we discussed earlier, the concept of a disaster recovery is all of my systems are gone, or major portions of my systems are gone, or offline. And how do I bring those back online so that I can continue working, continue operating, and keep my business executing the tasks it needs to do? When we move to the point where something, again, the bad thing has happened, and we need to declare that we're going to recover to a previous point in time, or a previous recovery time, or RTO, we need to be aware of how long is it going to take for that recovery to occur, and then also, in the event that my original systems come back online, how long is it going to take me to get back to my production environment? So for example, if we have, some people may have a situation where they have a backup facility where they're copying all their backup to a cloud disaster recovery or to an external location. And in the event of a disaster, they know, because they've done their planning, that they can fully recover their systems at the backup location inside of, say, 8 hours. But once the issue that has occurred that required the recovery to occur may not, in fact, be a data loss. It could be a system where physical access was prevented to the building, or only some of the systems were brought offline. So the ability to come back and bring your systems back to their normal state may be compromised. There are certainly backup solutions and disaster recovery solutions out there that once you go to your disaster recovery mode, returning to production can be very tedious, if not nearly impossible. So in the ideal world, what we do is we have multiple abilities to do disaster recovery, both locally on our own systems where the backup is occurring, as well as potentially at our offsite or cloud-based location. The data that we're backing up is, of course, oftentimes proprietary, and given some regulatory environments, like HIPAA or FINRA, it may in fact be required by law to protect other people from seeing this data. So as we discuss how we make our backups, we also need to talk about how we're going to protect the backups so that other people can't get a hold of them. Encryption of the data is required to kind of take place in multiple locations. There's the issue of of encrypting the data once it's on the final backup location or media, be that a tape or a disk. But there's also a matter of as we transmit our data between our system and our cloud or other disaster recovery location, is that data being encrypted while it's on the fly or actually moving across the wires? So those are certain considerations that we have to take into account when we're discussing backups as well. So again, the takeaway there is with regards to encryption of backups, there's really more than one area in which we have to be concerned about that encryption. It's both the final resting place as well as while that data is in transit across any public or non-private networks. So today we're going to talk about some of kind of the big five in terms of backup systems that are used. These are overly generalized, but they'll give a good handle on kind of the different options and why an individual might choose one or the other for their group. So I'll read them off real quickly here, but we have some more slides coming up. So we have the external disk, we've got our magnetic tape, we've got our online and cloud-based service backups, and we have a network disk, or NAS, network attached storage systems. And then we also have dedicated appliances. While we're going through this presentation, if anyone has any questions, this is just a good place to remind you that you can type them into the question bar, and we'll address them later on or at the end. The first type of backup this technology I'd like to discuss is an external disk. When we talk about external disk, we're oftentimes talking about a USB-based or pluggable type disk. A long time ago, we may have used floppy disks or zip drives for this. Now, the common method of using a direct attached external disk would be on a USB-based disk. These are very low-cost units. They can store multiple terabytes at a time, and they can be used using a wide variety of software to perform that backup. So one of the key differentiations here on the external disk is, unfortunately, it's a single piece of hardware that could fail and can be difficult to detect if that fails. It's also highly dependent on the software that we use to perform those backups. Because the external disk is just a target, the type of software we use may be able to make file-based backups or image-based backups. Certain Microsoft operating systems have backup software built into them that may or may not have limitations. Another one of the considerations is the off-site portion of it, or the ability to move that data to a position that's not actually physical location, that's not actually connected to the device you're trying to back up, requires people. And people are oftentimes have very good hearts and want to do the right thing, but in our experience over the years we've been doing with this, as soon as human beings are involved in as a critical part of an automated system, it's no longer automated. So in our experience, the external disk primary detractor is really that it requires people to operate, and unfortunately we can't always rely on that. Part of some of the reasons for that is that the devices can be rather confusing. There can be lots of cables. You might have multiple disks. You've got to plug one in and unplug another one, and if you don't do it in the right order, the system gets very confused. Additionally, many of the methods that people use for disaster recovery now require us to use certain types of virtualization, which is a method of emulating computers, one computer to the other. And those aren't necessarily easily accomplished with the nature of an external disk. So overall, I'd rate it in general, I think the external disk is a low-cost solution. It's good for backups, not particularly good for disaster recovery, and not particularly good for archiving either. The next type of backup I'd like to talk about is a magnetic tape. Magnetic tape has a long history of, and is very familiar to some folks, but essentially we're talking about a magnetic-based media where we're going to be able to create a job or task to back up the contents of one system onto a tape that's physically attached. The real kind of ticklers on these are that, unfortunately, they're very slow, both to back up and to recover, resulting in some pretty high RPOs and RTOs, which are oftentimes really don't meet the customer's needs. Again, we have a human factor of people being required to move tapes around. On the plus side, it is typically the lowest cost alternative. What you really need to do is make archives of very large volumes of data. So you'll see this in locations where people have a large volume of documents that they need to permanently archive for regulatory reasons. Overall, I'd rate this as a rather poor backup solution at this point, a poor disaster recovery solution, although an excellent option if your primary objective is to archive large amounts of files. With the advent of with the internet and high-speed internet connections and the ability, seemingly endless amount of space that's out there in the cloud, there are some good options for providing online or internet-based backup solutions. Both an advantage and a disadvantage is essentially the total lack of any local hardware. There's no additional parts you have to buy, but it all goes out to the cloud. That has advantages in the sense that the lower capital costs are good. Unfortunately, it really reduces the accessibility of that data in that it's your internet. All of your data is always an internet connection away. So should something happen where you lose access to your internet connection as part of a disaster, you may in fact lose temporary access to those files in the cloud. Additionally, the file level nature of online cloud backups doesn't really allow well for image-based backups for some technical reasons that have to do with that bandwidth. And so we often find that the backups that are created by online or cloud-based backups are not complete. So I would give this a higher rating for backup as long as you understand the types of backup that types of data that you're protecting, and you've thoroughly evaluated that the limitations of the types of backups won't affect you. Disaster recovery is not ideal in that your data is far away and can oftentimes take a long time to get to. And for archiving, you don't have any necessarily limited control as to how long that data will last. So give it poor marks there. With tape being no longer the de facto backup methods for folks, and hard drives becoming very, very cheap or inexpensive, we find a lot of folks are using large arrays of secondary disk, in order to make their backups and of both their systems and their files. So what we're talking about here is essentially a box that is going to has a network-attached storage, which is going to be a collection of hard drives that are presented to the network generally over an IP network. And that acts as a repository of any kind of data you want to throw at it. And in this case, we're talking about throwing copies of our data using onto this disk-based storage. It has the advantages over tape that it's always fast, it's readily available, and allows, because it's fast enough, it allows the ability to do those snapshot or image-based backups. So the network-attached storage has the ability to have very low RTO, high RPOs, and introduce all sorts of redundancies in order to protect our data. Our offsites, our components, are oftentimes handled by different data movers or different software applications that may move the data from our network-attached storage to a matched appliance at another location or out to the cloud, giving us that ability to have both local storage and off-site storage in an automated fashion. The methods of creating these network-attached storage backups are very flexible. However, as part of that, they become oftentimes very difficult to manage and oftentimes very complicated. The software that's used to create the images is very often a different solution that's used to transport them off-site, maybe a different piece of software that's used to manage the NAS appliance, which may be a different piece of software that's used to recover those images. So in a smaller environment, a network-attached storage can actually overwhelm a system administrator, people responsible for that network, because of its complexity. And as a result, complexity leads to things being overlooked or failures occurring. So in terms of the capabilities of the unit, however, I think it has an excellent opportunities to be a great backup, DR, and archiving solution.
Hey, Phil, before you go to the next slide, great explanation. I did appreciate the complicated to manage piece, because many of the solutions don't. One piece or one module of the software doesn't necessarily accomplish all facets, like you were saying, and I think that's something that our customers sometimes don't fully appreciate and understand, is that like the software that actually takes the data from your production environment to the initial target of the backup, like the network attached storage, is oftentimes there's a different software then that'll take that image now that it's on the backup and replicates it off-site and make sure that that's synchronized, as well as in a different software that might be actually alerting and managing the entire environment to make sure that those failures, if there are any failures, that we can modify that. So that's, I appreciate you mentioning that the complicated part requires oversight. I mean, people need to be paying attention to that. So thank you for that. The question that came in from the audience I did want to ask is, it talks that you said low RTO and high RPO. I think there's a good opportunity. They're asking assuming that's good, right?
Yes.
So can you articulate a little bit about that, or just kind of elaborate briefly on that?
Absolutely. So again, going back to the recovery time objective and the recovery point objectives, what we're looking for is, in an ideal world, we'd be able to go back to any point in time and be able to do so instantly. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world, and so as the way backup technologies work, we have to create different points in time we can go back to, as reflected by the recovery point objectives. And so the more options we have in terms of the number of times we can go back to can help us mitigate against different types of accidents. As an example, if I have one of the reasons I may need to go back to my backup is that someone deleted a file. And perhaps someone was working on a file yesterday and someone else deleted it this morning, and now it's the afternoon, and you want to get that file back. Going back to a point in time of last Thursday doesn't help us meet this objective. We can't recover that file that was modified in between our last recovery point and now. So modern image-based snapshot backups often try and create or keep up multiple points in time that we can go back to. A common scenario would be, and certainly some of the systems that we use here at Mytech allow us to go back to a variety of points in time, oftentimes as far back ago as a year or 2 years ago. However, we can also go back in time to last month or last week or yesterday or even the last few hours. So the way that works is we generally keep a fixed number of recovery points that kind of roll over time. So an example will be creating a snapshot on a hourly basis. And at the end of the day, we'll wrap those up into a single daily snapshot. And we'll keep those daily snapshots for up to a week. And then after that, we'll roll them up into months and years. So that's kind of the recovery point objective. And so having higher recovery point objective is definitely a good thing. It gives you more options in terms of how you can recover your backup and how long you have to identify that something bad has happened. The low recovery time objective is really that ability from the time the boss calls and says, I want the file, to how long you can get that file back. Also in the event, again, that the big bad thing happens, how long is it going to take us to get back into operation? And faster is always better in these scenarios. So, does that help explain what we're talking about there with why low RTO and high RPO are good things?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, the two practical examples that I've, or two very common examples that I think our customers have, that I've heard our customers bring up is, the low RTO means I can recover it fast, right? Because it's a low amount of time, and so everyone always wants that. But the actual, like some of the practical examples I've seen for the value of the high RPO, which means the multiple points as you explained, is there are times when, a file might have been created yesterday and accidentally deleted yesterday. And if you don't have multiple points even inside of a given day, and you only do a once-a-day backup, that file will never be captured because it never went over the threshold where it's into the next day. So sometimes it's created and lost, or created and corrupted, or created in a problem in the same day. And so having multiple points within a day can help you make sure you recover from that. And the other one that I've seen that have come from our customers is when something changed, something went bad, somebody deleted something, but they didn't realize it for a month or 2 or 3. And so they need to be able to go back not just to yesterday or the last week, but they needed to go out several months because they didn't realize that the data was actually lost or that it was corrupt or that someone had deleted something critical. So I think that's the two probably most common examples that I've seen over the years of why a high RPO, as far as a lot of different points in time in which you can go back and recover, is a key to a backup solution. So thanks for the question online, and thanks for the elaboration, Phil.
No problems. However, I'm going to one-up you. I'm going to add a third example of where a high RPO is
Please do.
very useful. An example of that are, so far we've been talking about files and files being modified. But again, as we discussed earlier, that image-based backup allows us to take pictures and images of systems as a whole. So one of the questions we'll often ask our clients as we're discussing what kind of backup and DR solutions are good for them is, how much time can you lose? And the example we often give is, if your email server goes down and you lost 2 hours of email in between noon and 2, is that acceptable? If you lost all of your email since yesterday, is that acceptable? If you're running a service-based business like we do, and we have softwares and systems and databases that keep track of all of our notes and our tickets and our communications with our customers, if we have to evaluate ourselves, what is the value to our business if I lost 3 days worth of transactions and all the notes and all the phone calls and all the information I collected from on my system. So that's another portion there where that recovery point objective, being as small as possible, is really critical. And in some cases, for financial institutions, it may be 0. There may not be allowed to be any loss of data, in which case we have to look at alternate systems again. So moving on, we've talked about kind of these first 4 types of backup, and what's out there now, and we've talked about how the network attached storage has lots of options and is really kind of a great solution. And what we'll find now is that there are many managed service providers like Mytech Partners and other organizations are creating appliances which are essentially NAS-based storage systems where they're going to wrap up all the monitoring and the software and the alerting and the recovery of those systems along with their offsite storage into one package. Some of the advantages of these things is that they're hands-off from the local management system, from the local company system administrator. These are generally fully managed appliances, so the hardware is provided, the software is provided, the offsite storage is provided, and there's often, and in the case of Mytech for certain, we have people standing by that are monitoring the logs 24 hours a day, ensuring that these systems are all working great. So kind of best of breed is a dedicated appliance which can really allow us to do the local and cloud-based storage, automated image-based backups, full alerting on all of our components, and really low local management. The downsides are, of course, that these systems come with a cost, which oftentimes results in kind of a low initial capital cost, but a higher operating cost than some of the previous systems we've talked about. However, when you add up all the software and management costs that are involved, these are oftentimes a very good value in that the provider that's providing these dedicated appliances has been able to work on some savings from the scale at which they're deploying these units. So certainly Mytech has options for all these types of backups, including a dedicated appliance available to you. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to Mytech for questions on that.
Yeah, and Philip, thank you. As a follow-up on that, the purposes of our Mytech U discussions are really to be educational in nature, but you can tell that Mytech does have an opinion as far as what we feel strongly about and recommend. And one of the things that we take very seriously, and I'd say even amongst our peers, we pay more attention to backups than the average bear, so to speak. And I know that I've had people come to me and say, well, I want to use XYZ solution, and Mytech has basically 3 or 4 approved types of backup solutions that we feel comfortable where if you are asking us to execute, we feel comfortable that we can actually deliver on all these things, RTOs and RPOs and expectations that are set. But if you ask us to use something else other than one of our approved solutions, our answer to that is you can do whatever you want with your backup as long as you don't try and hold us accountable. So that's kind of the trick, is that we have spent time in vetting these details to make sure that we can stand behind our recommendations and our solutions. So that's which is what you want, right? You want a company that's going to stand behind their solution. So that's, I guess, tagging off of what you just mentioned, Philip, that I'd like to also put in the perspective of, these are the different generic things about backups that people should be considering, and Mytech definitely has our approved solutions that have different options as far as the fit and how your business requirements, RTO and RPO, can align to these different solutions, and so you can choose the right backup for you. So moving on. So thank you, Philip.
Very well. Well, I've provided an overview of kind of the different methods of backup we have available and the differences between archiving and disaster recovery and backup. And we've talked a little bit about those RTOs and RPOs. And this all comes down to the reason we do this stuff is because we have obligations to keep the information protected, but there's also a cost associated with loss of any information. In order to discuss that a little bit, I'd like to hand the stage back over to Nathan Austin to address those issues. So Nathan, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Philip. So now we really wanted to spend time discussing how should you think about these different variables with recovery. Again, backups aren't just for backing up, it's for how do you need to recover. The other thought that I'd like you all to be thinking about and have some awareness as we continue this part of the discussion is not all of your systems have the same criticality, let's say, right? So if your organization is driven off of email communication from your customers and your vendors, email might be one of those critical recovery points that you need to have, less than an hour of return to operations, right? If something were to happen. But maybe your file shares might be less critical because you probably have something in your email, or people might have some information in a synchronized drive or something like that. So it's versus maybe a CRM solution or an ERP package. The different operational aspects of your environment, of your technical environment, are going to have different recovery objectives based on how important they are to your business and the impact they'll have on your organization. So we obviously can't go through all different scenarios across all different customers, but I'd encourage you to think about your organization and those different systems that you run off of when looking at these different points. And the other thing about, as we go through some of these details with regard to recovery, Phil talked about a low RTO, which is our ability to recover you faster. That's really what this slide is about, and that there are multiple variables involved, not just your backup, that play into making sure that we can meet those different recovery timelines. And as I mentioned, these are going to be different depending on the different solutions. So having your email at Office 365 hosted by Microsoft, and then having a redundant spam filter that allows you to have nearly zero downtime on your email is something that is very easy to do, very cost-effective to do for your email. But that might not be very cost-effective for your ERP package. So just, again, notice giving a couple of illustrations of that. So let's talk about inside of 4 hours. So just one example here. Let's say you declared a disaster. Say you walk in the morning and the pipe above your server room burst, and the equipment in that room is dead, or at least your server is dead. If your backup is still okay, right, we would be able to, then we can get you back up and running. But the thing is, if you don't have a good hardware warranty, if we don't have your data in the cloud, we might not be able to get you access to that data for a while. So inside of 4 hours enables us to, we can actually turn on, in some of the solutions, we can actually turn on a virtual image of your production environment and actually get you back up and running inside of 4 hours. What that looks like is typically to declare disaster, we spend a little bit of time triaging and looking at the solution, and we decide, hey, you know what, we're not going to be able to recover this hardware inside of 4 hours, so we're going to revert you over to the disaster mode, and we're going to get you up and running inside that 4 hours if you have the right solution in place. Now, inside of 8 hours might be something a little different where we actually, you have some spare equipment standing by. So let's say your production server dies, but you have a spare server sitting around, or we're able to procure one locally, and we can bring it in, and we have to transfer files to it from your backup and get you back up and running there, right? So ways in which we can do that by having some hot spare or cold spare equipment. The other thing that inside of 8 hours plays is that a lot of warranty options that you have out there are next business day. You can do 24/7, 4-hour response. And so if you have a failure on your server, maybe it's just a hard drive, maybe it's 2 hard drives, but if you have a failure on your server, and in order to get you back up and running, requires us to receive a replacement part from the manufacturer, if you have a next business day warranty, then our best case scenario is next business day. So when you consider the warranty that you buy on some of your equipment, making sure that you align the warranties that you buy with the production equipment and how it might impact a disaster or recovery effort. So that's where kind of that hardware warranty piece comes into play. The other piece where variables to consider on the file versus image backup, for example, is if you just have file backups and something goes horribly wrong on your server, or your application goes corrupt, has a corruption, you'll need to reinstall operating systems. If you only have a file level backup, you'll have to reinstall operating systems, reinstall your application, and configure all the different customizations you may have on those applications, and then we can recover the files back into your environment. If you have an image-based backup, all of that data, the operating system, the application, and the files are all included in that. So the recovery effort is much faster because we don't have to reinstall and recustomize and complete the customizations over again for applications. I mentioned the spare equipment or time to replace hardware. For instance, Mytech does keep some not a plethora of spares, but we do have some spare equipment that in the event of a disaster or some significant hardware failure, we can typically get something on site within 24 to 48 hours, and so that we can start the recovery effort and get data back onto at least an interim piece of equipment. Oftentimes, too, you can get equipment overnighted. So if your recovery time, if your business objectives are such that we can wait if something happens today, and we can order a piece of equipment that can arrive tomorrow, and that's an acceptable recovery time frame for you, well, then that could be part of your disaster recovery strategy. You know what? We can wait 24 to 48 hours to overnight a piece of equipment and to get us back in production on that piece of equipment, and that's acceptable to us. Great. That can be part of the plan. And oftentimes insurance will actually help cover some of these costs if you do, in fact, have a disaster, of course, as long as you have that on your insurance package. And we're not insurance advisors, but that's something that I've definitely seen our customers take advantage of when they've had different failures and disasters over the years. And finally, I do like to talk about cloud storage with regard to DR in the cloud. Sometimes being able to actually turn on your environment into a production environment in the cloud is an option. That does take time to make that happen, but knowing that if something were to happen, like I know that some of our peers had this happen in Joplin, Missouri several years ago when that tornado ripped through the town, they had to revert to using cloud backups for those that had it. So that's definitely something, it's a nice option from a disaster recovery perspective if you can actually get that data into the cloud, or if that option is available where you move your data in the cloud. But another variable as far as if your data is in the cloud, and if it's only in the cloud, if you're trying to recover that data, which might have taken weeks to get off site, and now all of a sudden you have a disaster locally and you're trying to pull that data back, well, now you might be in a situation where it's taking you a long time, taking a long time to recover that information, right? If it took weeks to get off site, guess what? It's going to take days, if not weeks, to get back. So that might not be an effective part of the recovery effort. So just be aware of some of those variables as you consider the ability to recover. It's not just about the backup solution itself. It's also about the capabilities of the surrounding information and and things like warranty and spare equipment. All those variables play into being able to get a low RTO, as Philip mentioned, which is what everybody wants, is to be able to recover quickly.
Sure. Sounds great, Nathan. I think to summarize what we're talking about is you need to understand the different systems you have, what their requirements are in terms of recoverability, understand that there are different types of technologies, have different RTOs and RPOs, and have a plan so that you know when you need to pull the trigger, what the consequences of that are.
Thank you for that last point, Philip, especially having a plan and thinking through some of these things. You're probably not going to be able to think through every single scenario, but thinking through some key scenarios and knowing this is the action that you want to be able to take. If you think through that ahead of time, it'll hopefully you never have to use it, but if in the event you do, you'll be ready to execute.
And obviously some of the reasons you make those decisions are based on the costs that being down might incur your organization.
True, exactly. So, and thank you for the segue. So one of the things that customers over the years have asked for is like, well, what should I spend on a disaster recovery or a backup solution? How do I know if it's an appropriate number, right? And so we put together some metrics that give you some perspective on, what do you want to try and protect against? When we looked at some of the recovery times, we talked about, let's say 24 hours or 1 day versus 48 hours or 2 days, 3 days, something like that, and think about how that impacts your organization. So this is just a decent-sized small business. Let's say if there's some numbers I'm going to set up here, so we're going to try and figure out how can we calculate the impact of being down for a business day for this organization of top-line revenue, $8 million, right? So we have a little ratio, so top-line revenue divided by the number of business hours in a year, so that's 2,080 hours, so that gives you the revenue per hour. Revenue per hour times 8 hours, then that gives you 1 business day revenue. Should have done that calculation slightly differently, but you get the idea. So now let's talk about an $8 million top-line revenue company. So they generate $30,000 per business day. So if you're down for 1 day, now that might not necessarily mean, again, I also understand that different organizations process information differently and invoice differently or service differently. So if your production line is down, you might not be able to build anything. If you're, in our industry, if you're still able to service our customers, some of us would still be able to continue service, but some of our organization would be down. So for Mytech, that might be a little bit different than what it is for you if you have a production environment or a financial services firm, et cetera. So, but just for the sake of the example, you kind of get the idea, $30,000 per business day. And we have found that when we look at different disaster recovery solutions and backup solutions that offer a low RTO, a good combination of backup, disaster recovery, as well as archive, again with the full features, over a 3 to 5 year period of time will cost your organization between 1 and 2 days of top-line revenue. So for an $8 million a year company, they're looking like somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 is an appropriate investment, or a good ballpark, at least from a budgetary guideline perspective. Now, if you can get it cheaper than that, great. But if you, from a budgetary perspective, that's a good number to use. And when you look at that and put it into perspective, again, based on those metrics, DR investments over time will be between 0.12% and 0.25% of your overall revenue over that period of time. So it's actually, when you consider it, it does look like a big number. I mean, $30,000 to $60,000, that's a lot. But when you compare that to actual revenue over time, it's a very, very, very small percentage of your actual revenue to allocate towards being able to make sure that your business can continue operations in the event of disaster. So that's really what we wanted to put in perspective, give you some budgetary numbers, and wrap some reality around the actual investments and how low, relatively percentage-wise it is as you consider different backups and disaster recovery and archive methodology. So moving on to the next slide, please. Basically, just a quick summary. So, and Philip, I'll let you kind of interject here as well. But we wanted to talk generically about different variables that you should be aware of and concepts you should be aware of with regard to backup and things to consider. Philip spent a lot of time going over, in particular, the exact type of, like the common backups that actually exist in the market today, and the pros and cons of those. As far as, I liked how he put together he rated them on a backup, disaster recovery, and archive basis, so that gives you some good insight into the pros and cons of those respective types of solutions. And finally, just giving you some abilities, what are the variables that go into recovery, not just the backup solution itself, but all the other pieces around it, as well as some of the financial metrics as far as what would be a good budgetary guideline for your organization that you can use just based off of top-line revenue. So that's what we covered. I guess any final thoughts, Philip? I don't see any questions from the audience at the moment, but any final thoughts?
Just want to thank everyone for their time, and I just understand that backup and DR is something I feel pretty passionate, and we at Mytech are quite particular about. And I think the big takeaway is that there are lots of technologies, and there are lots of solutions, and there are lots of needs. And the real thing is understanding what your options are and understanding the ramifications of the decisions you're making. Have a plan.
Yes, Philip, I agree. Having a plan, thinking through these variables, and understanding the different impacts they're going to have on your organization. And that's where we can help, right? We understand that. We have some experience with that across our customer base, and we're happy to help. So the final slide is just kind of a thanks for participating. You can always shoot us an email or give us a shout at our office. Philip and I are available to chat, as well as many other resources here on our team. And thank you very much for participating in this month's Mytech U discussion.